Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. In this video, we're going to look at the topic of Norito. Now, I've put the kanji and the kana on the screen so that you can know what this word looks and sounds like correctly. Norito is an old Shinto chant or ritual prayer. Formal Norito take place during formal Shinto rituals at shrines. But you do have folk Norito, or these more simple Norito, that can take place anywhere, anytime. It can be chanted by anyone. So these can come as pure Shinto, quote unquote, pure Shinto chants, but it's very common for them to be blended with some kind of Buddhist aspect as well. So for example, it's very common to see a Buddhist mudra, a hand gesture, intermixed or done alongside a Shinto Norito. So the Jingunden and the Oboshiden are filled with Norito. Most of them being, like I said, short songs, short chants intended to invoke a particular deity or a particular shrine, particular ancestor, but they can also be used to invoke some particular ancient event. And again, as I said, because Shinto and Buddhism are mixed in old Japan, it's perfectly normal to see Buddhist rites and Norito side by side. The Tada Genji tradition has several Norito. And in this video, we're actually going to show you a Norito from the Fukushima Shinobi no Maki. But not just yet. We have to discuss this, explain this a little bit more before we get there. So before we do that, let's take a moment to cover some important points. Formal Norito have rules and sometimes even requirements, such as people from specific families or specific bloodlines have to perform those chants. So for example, in the Great Exorcism Rite, it is required that someone descended from the Nakatomi, aka Fujiwara, that person has to be the one to perform the exorcism chant. Another point is there is an ancient document from the 900s called the Engi Shiki, and that is an ancient text that contains most of the rituals and rites and chants, offerings, etc., etc. It is the go-to document that is a massive catalog of Shinto rites and Shinto ceremonies, etc., etc. Another point is that the Tada Genji documents, as I said earlier, the Tada Genji documents have a lot of these Norito. Most of them are shorter Norito, not long ones, and we'll discuss what short and long ones are. But for in this moment, just know that the Tada Genji documents have many short Norito, but there are also some commentaries where Tada Genji authors have done commentaries on some of the longer, more formal rites and the longer, more formal Norito. So an important aspect of the Norito that we need to look at is we need to see the difference between a Norito and a Buddhist mantra. Now, Shinto and Buddhism go hand in hand in samurai culture, but we need to look at this distinction. And that distinction is that Buddhist mantra are usually a single name or a single word or a phrase that is repeated over and over again by the practitioner. The power doesn't come from the meaning of the mantra. The power comes from the empowerment that is invoked during the mantra's recitation. So in Buddhism, in esoteric Buddhism, the practitioner is given an initiation, an empowerment, and with that comes a transmission of power. Then the mantra is recited to activate that transmission of power. So the mantra, the meaning of the mantra is not that important. What's important is the invocation, the activation of that power received during the initiation via the mantra recitation. Norito, on the other hand, usually, well, not always, but most of the time, almost all the time, the Norito has an actual meaning. So for example, many Norito are actual phrases or chanted histories, formal request, etc., etc., etc. Some of the long formal Norito done under the formal rites at shrines are basically like long histories of a particular event, just chanted in a ritual setting. So, but one example of a short Norito is out of the Iga region. And you do this, you recite this when you're using some sort of flowing water to wash your hands or your mouth. And while you're washing your hands and your mouth, you say, Moro moro no magagoto tsume kegare, o harae tamae kiyome tamae, right? While you're doing that. And then what that means is all deceitful, impure, and unclean things, please be expelled. Please, expel, purify. So, and the please in here is related to sort of to the Shinto deities, right? You're asking the gods, you're asking the deities to purify, to expel impure, unclean things from you, right? So basically, purification. But the difference here is that it is a prayer made to the gods, and it is a translatable statement. And so that not only shows a very short Norito, but that also is the difference between a Norito and a mantra. Whereas it's an actual phrase that you can translate that has a distinct meaning. You're actually saying a sentence, and it's being beseeched to the gods. Whereas the Buddhist mantra is an empowered sound that you're repeating to invoke a blessing or a empowerment that you receive during an initiation. So while these two are often used by samurai, they are distinct. So now let us move on to this Fukushima-ryu Shinobi technique taken from the Fukushima-ryu Shinobi no Maki. For those of you that know my previous work, if you have a copy of Sacred Conspiracy, you can flip to that page. You'll see that it's in there. And for those that don't, it's provided on the screen. So this technique is called knowing the form of nighttime objects. And you'll see I've put the kanji, I've broken that down. So the first part is nighttime things, things during the night. And then there's a kanji that can mean body or substance or reality. And in this particular case, it refers to both sort of the shape and also the reality of nighttime things. So it's translated kind of as knowing the form of nighttime objects, but you can also understand it as knowing the reality of nighttime objects. But since it's specifically related to the visual shape, we've gone with the translation of form, but it could be reality, knowing the reality of nighttime objects or knowing the form of nighttime objects. And then on the arrow to the red arrows pointing over to the right, that's just a clip from the actual text, giving you an idea of what it looks like in the document. And before we move on, just want to say that night things or nighttime things can refer to animals at night, like foxes, raccoons, whatever, things like that, right? People, or it can also refer to ghosts, right? So it can refer to animals, can refer to people, it can refer to creatures like ghosts and ghouls and goblins. But it can also refer to just the general idea of how things appear at night. So this particular bit, and this is important because this technique is specifically related to all of those at night. So let's jump right into it. So the text basically says, chant, hito futa mio itsu muyo nana ya koko no tare momo chiyurutsu, right? That's what the red arrows that are pointing up and to the right, that's what that's showing. So that's the chant. And then it says you chant, or the kanji used actually is to sing or chant. So you sing, chant, recite this 3 times. Then you put your hands together in gasho or prayer, right? A prayer mudra, the gasho mudra, and you hold this idea or this intention, and then you make a diamond shape hand mudra and look at the object through the opening, the diamond shaped opening. And in this way, the actual or true form or the reality of the object or the person or the animal or whatever it is can be seen and understood. Now, a couple of notes here. First thing, let's start with the blue. So where it says make the diamond shaped hand, I got a little asterisk. We translated it as diamond, but it's actually a type of like water chestnut. It's it's a specific shape that is uh, it's a diamond shape, but it's also kind of can be considered like a spade shape or not a perfect triangle, but it's a specific type of shape, and it just comes from when you have your hands in gasho, and then after you say the Norito 3 times, then you just sort of you keep your fingers together, but you open your hands, sort of spread your palms out so that it makes this sort of spade shape or diamond shape or sort of rounded triangle shape, and then you hold that out and you look through the that shape, the hole that you've made, the opening, to see the object. And as far as the chant itself goes, we want to. So what it's basically saying is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. That's the direct translation of the Norito. This is an old Shinto chant. This is an old Norito. And before we move on, I just want to note that the text itself is written Yorotsu for 10,000, even though the way that it's usually pronounced is Yorozu. And so instead of TSU, it's ZU, like Yorotsu versus Yorozu. And then also 10 is written or pronounced kind of interesting in this version because 10 is usually, in Norito, 10 is usually pronounced to or towo, right, for 10, uh, but it's pronounced tari in this chant. Now the other thing to point out before I move on is the way that all of these numbers are pronounced in this chant is an old way of counting in Japanese. These aren't the normal way of counting in Japanese. This is a very older, ancient more way of counting. And with that taken into consideration, we have an interesting bit where in the old way of counting, then 10 would be towo, or when specifically talking about counting of people or counting of living beings, it could be pronounced dotari. So, and that's how tari means 10 within this chant, even though it is kind of an interesting way of saying 10. That's why tari means 10. Now the question may be, what is the deal with counting? Why is that a Norito? And let's look at that. There's sort of 2 layers to this. One, as I said, there is an old Norito used as part of a purification chant. It's usually these days, and it's still used to this day. And you'll often see it in different forms, like the form that we just did, and then but you'll see it's like hi fu mi yo imu na ya koto, right? That's another sort of a modern version of this Norito. And then you'll see it has different permutations, etc., etc. Some are very short, some are long. And how it's pronounced, whether they're using, whether it says, like, for example, he for one or he to for one. Ultimately, the point is you're counting from 1 to 100 to 10,000, etc., etc., etc. So that's point number 1. This is a well-established, very long-standing purification Norito. But the question is, why is counting a purification spell or a purification prayer or chant? And the reason comes from, so number 2 is the reason. The reason is for the counting, it's an invocation and a purification by the power of the numbers themselves. We also find this within the chanting of the syllables or the chanting of alphabet as part of the purification of speech. So let's look at that a little bit more. So, for example, just like the Iroha poem is said to bring peace and pacification due to its nature. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the Iroha poem, go ahead and Google it. Going into its complexity is too much for this video, but if you're aware of it, good. If you're not, Google it, and you'll understand what I mean by it's supposed to bring peace and pacification based on its nature. And then also in Buddhism, there's something called the purification of speech, which involves the chanting of the Sanskrit alphabet. So it starts with and it goes on and on and on through the Sanskrit alphabet. And you repeat this chant over and over again to purify the speech, purify the situation. And it's usually used in conjunction with other purification mantras. So this particular Norito involves the same idea. It's the cleansing power of, but in this case, not the cleansing power of the recitation of the syllables of the alphabet, of vowels and consonants, but the cleansing power of the invocation of numbers. So by counting in this way of a sacred way of counting, a sacred chant, you invoke the numbers to pacify the mind and purify the vision. So again, even though this may seem like one is merely counting, one is using the numbers to connect to the divine and to purify the situation. So, in the case of this technique, Shinobi is out at night, and because of any number of various reasons, is having a hard time seeing the actual shapes of various objects and or people or creatures or animals or whichever it is. All right. This may be that human beings may look strange or even distorted, and you may be tempted to think that what you're seeing may be some kind of spirit or goblin. So to calm the mind, to correct one's perception, one invokes the divine by purification by numbers and looks through that shape, what we're calling the diamond shape, or the chestnut shape, that they have made from their prayer mudra. So you start in gasho, and then you bend your fingers and move your palms out to create this spade shape, this water chestnut shape, this diamond shape. And as you're looking through that, so you've chanted, well, you hold your hands in gasho, you do the chant, and then you extend your arms and make this shape, and then look at the object through the shape. This purification allows you to see the object more carefully. And again, this is used on living things to get a better idea of what you're actually looking at, but it can also be used on inanimate objects at night just to get a better sense of visually a better sense of what's going on. Within the Kusunoki Kaden, there are a couple of sections, one section in particular, but there's a couple sections, but it discusses the need to calm the mind and not believe that you're seeing spirits or demons. And so in relation to that, this Fukushima technique provides you a concrete purification technique in order to help you do just that. So again, I will make another video probably next saying the difference between there's also a technique in Kusunoki-ryu about tracking things at night, visually tracking things at night. So this is not about visually tracking things at night. This is about determining what it is that you're actually seeing. And so for various reasons, you might see things in very distorted ways. So this is about purifying your vision and seeing them correctly, like getting the shape correct. And while you may wish to conclude that this technique might work simply because it calms the mind down, don't forget that in the samurai's worldview, the calming of the mind is a spiritual event. It is a spiritual technique. Thus, even if there is no gods and the numbers have no power, even if this is purely just a works just off of psychology, it's still considered a spiritual thing from the samurai perspective because it involves the mind state or involves the mental state of the person. We take a look at the picture on the screen. Well, this goes back to the video I did of karma, where you have the cause, the ripening condition, and the result. But the reason that even if it's just psychology, quote unquote, it's still spiritual is because you'll see where it says mind state, emotion, previous traces, and as they enter this line, the line gets thicker where the red arrow is pointing. It's because I explained in the karma video, the emotional state at the time of an action being committed plays in to the karma. So anything having to do with the emotional state of the mind, confusion, anger, etc., directly impacts the karmic dynamic. So what this means is that which is just referred to as psychology is technically still part of the spiritual process from the mindset of the samurai. So this Fukushima-ryu technique is something that you can try on your own. This Norito requires no initiation or training. It's one you can do based solely on the divine connection of your speech and numbers. So sort of uh, the natural divine quality of numbers themselves. It does use the little hand mudra, but the mudra is really, it's for just focusing your eyes. This isn't the type of mudra that's used as part of a tantric ritual. So it's not an actual seal that when combined with an empowerment and a mudra, it unseals something. It's really just, your hands are in prayer, and then you make this little uh, diamond triangle shape with your hands so that you can actually look through that, sort of focus your vision. It's not a tantric mudra. So this Norito is not a mantra. This hand gesture is not a tantric mudra. They don't require initiation or transmission. It's an old Shinto chant, a Shinto prayer, Shinto song that's been used since ancient times. So next time you're out at night and you're seeing a lot of weird stuff in the dark, give this a try.